Joining me now is House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. Speaker Pelosi, we're going to talk about Joe Biden. You know him so well. He's the nominee of the Democratic Party, and there's a lot to talk about. But I do want to start with something I don't think has received enough attention, which is Donald Trump and his performance in that debate. Because there were some alarming things he said during that debate. As you were watching, what stuck out to you as the moment where you wish it would be blasted everywhere and people would watch it and understand the threat he poses?
Well, how are you? Good to see you.
Great to see you.
There's stiff competition for that moment. There's stiff competition for that moment because it was a constant manifesto, again, of lies. As you may recall, I tore up his speech at the State of the Union because it was a total manifesto of lies, and that's what we saw the other night, which must be rejected, as well as his candidacy. Of course, one that stood out was about January 6th. This man would not send the National Guard. The Republicans know that because some of them were in there when we were asking for it, begging for it, to the Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of Defense, and the president, of course, is the ultimate commander-in-chief, and he would not send it. So for him to go on TV and lie about that, the instigator of an insurrection against the Congress of the United States, against the Constitution of the United States, against the Capitol of the United States, and just pass it off. So that was tough. But in terms of what it means at the kitchen table for America's working families, for him to talk about Roe v. Wade the way he did, either he doesn't know what he's talking about or he's totally lying, or both. So it's a terrible combination. So when people look at that, okay, it was not a good night. Let's face that in terms of performance for Joe Biden. He's so much better than that. But what it means to people in their lives, he answered questions about policy. How can you have a legitimate debate when somebody is totally lying and you have to completely dispel their falsehoods? But in any case, three things I would say. A woman's right to choose, he lied about that. This is very important to women. It's a freedom issue. It's an economic issue. It's a kitchen table issue. It's a personal issue. In terms of jobs, Joe Biden, 15 million new jobs. The other guy, the worst job performance since Herbert Hoover. And he's saying, oh, he did this and he did that. In terms of COVID, it was terrible. His denial and his delay on COVID killed people. What he did on January 6th, people died or were hurt. This is a dangerous person and evil. And then I would say on the economy, which is so important, I talked about the jobs, 16 Nobel laureates, 16 economic Nobel laureates said the other guy's fiscal policies will have inflation go up. So again, it is, I mean, if you talk about climate, and he sat with the fossil fuel industry and said, give me $1 billion for my campaign so I can reverse what they've done to save the planet. So everything that matters to people, whether it's gun violence, protection, you name it, this person has been on the negative end of it all. And everybody's talking about what Joe Biden did. Thank you for asking about him, because it was terrible. And our members, the one thing I would say about them the day after, Friday morning when we went in for votes, is it was stunning to see the Republicans embrace this pack of lies. Once again, they know that that isn't true, what he was saying, or else they're just in a state of disillusionment. But in fact, people have to make the vote for themselves. And what they saw between the two of them did not change many minds, as Molly was saying earlier, because people are smarter than that. But on the other hand, why do we talk all about Joe Biden? This guy's old. He doesn't have a stream of thought that is logical. And nobody says anything about that he could be so disassociated from the facts. You saw on one side of the screen integrity, concern for people. On the other side, you saw dishonesty and self-serving lies.
No question, and we have definitely been talking about it. And I think the reason it's important to talk about President Biden is for people to understand what the options are here, right? And the different choices people are throwing out there. I'm sure you've gotten a million calls from people. You've probably been talking to donors and members and everybody out there in the Democratic Party. There was a report I wanted to ask you about because anonymous sources, I'm always a little skeptical of. There's a couple of anonymous sources saying in an NBC story that you told members you were concerned about Joe Biden's viability, not his talent as a president and all of his accomplishments, but his viability as a candidate. And you're not an anonymous source. You're the person. So I want to ask you if that's true.
We have informed NBC that that was not true. It couldn't be further from the truth. If anything, I'm being criticized for being so clear about Joe Biden and his decision about running for office. So that completely was not true. I don't know where they got that, but I've had a problem with NBC News and thereby some of their things they put forth. That's why you don't see me on Meet the Press or any of those shows. But the fact is, no, I never said that. And I don't know that the other people they claim said that. We have to win the election. We always subject how we go forward in terms of our mobilization at the grassroots level. And let me tell you, I've been in California, North and South. People are there for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They are there for them. They know that this is challenging. No, it's difficult. It always is. Elections are tough. They're not easy things. They're tough. And you have to own the ground to get out your vote. You have to have a message of what difference it makes in people's lives. The kitchen table issues of personal freedom and job opportunity and education and climate and the rest, guns, violence protection and the rest, and what it means to people. And you have to have the money to get it done. And Joe Biden has, he raised $14 million after that poor performance in the debate. But let me just say this. One of the things that did happen is people have said to me, we're going to give so much more money now to you for the House Democrats, because watching, I hate to use his name, what's his name, lie so much on TV, we know we must win the House, as at the same time we elect the president and we elect a Democratic Senate. So let's be calm. Let's be prayerful. It's a Sunday morning. Let's be clear in terms of evaluating what the possibilities are and the rest. But let us recognize that Joe Biden has been a great president of the United States, and what he is putting forth for the future. It's not about the past. Nobody votes for you because you deserve it. They want to know what you're going to do next. And what he has next to do is to continue his agenda for the people, putting people over politics. And that means more for women in the workplace, family and medical leave, child tax credit, affordable child care, so that many more women can participate in all of the bills that he passed, whether it's to protect our veterans. Imagine that this guy was trying to lay claim to doing more for veterans. We did hundreds of billions of dollars to help veterans who are victims of burn pits. And then denying that he said what he said about the veterans. Just think of what he said about John McCain, a national hero, a prisoner of war. Just such a super patriot, and this guy was downgrading him because he was captured. There's something wrong there, and there's something doubly wrong by the Republicans who wrap their arms around that.
So I have one more question for you. We've been talking on this show just about all the different paths, just to help people understand. Congressman Jim Clyburn said, quote, recently, I'm a Biden-Harris person, so I'm not getting away from that. I'm for Biden-Harris. I'm going to be for Biden if Harris ain't there. And I'm going to be for Harris if Biden ain't there. I just want to be very clear here. There's no indication Joe Biden is not going to be the nominee. But are you in the same place as Clyburn, your colleague?
Well, I'm in my own place, and that place is I support the Biden-Harris ticket. I think they've a very successful presidency and vice presidency and have more to get done. And hopefully if we can get rid of the filibuster and pass bills with 51 votes instead of 60, we can accomplish much more as we go forward.
Does that mean, though, that you'd support Harris if Biden? If Biden wasn't on the ticket, you'd support Harris?
You know what? Biden is going to be. I'm saying to you that I support the Biden-Harris ticket. I'm not abandoning Joe Biden right now for any speculation. Biden, Harris, both of them. I'm enthusiastically supporting them, as are many of our grassroots people. So while the intelligentsia may have some analysis of what people are thinking, what we're hearing that people are thinking is they support the ticket, and I support the ticket.
Voters are most important. Let me ask you about the Supreme Court.
Okay.
I wanted to just ask you about the Supreme Court, because there is a very important ruling that's coming down tomorrow morning regarding presidential immunity. They've waited for 6 months. They've delayed, making it so that the American public will not see a hearing, will not see a verdict on its very important case. What is your reaction to all of this? What are you watching for? What should people understand about the delay and what we're looking ahead to tomorrow?
Well, thank you for that question. If the court tomorrow says that the former president is above the law, they will have done a grave disservice to justice in our country. Let us hope that they have show us some allegiance to their oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that just because you're president doesn't mean you're immune from prosecution if you break the law. So that will be a big test for the court tomorrow to see if they honor their oath of office.
They've given us a lot to doubt them lately.
By delaying as they have undermined justice in our country, in my view.
No question. Could not agree with you more.
And by the way, let's just go back to January 6th. Let's go back to January 6th, because this is one of the charges against the president. The president goes on TV and says, I planned my own assassination. No, I didn't. He did. They're going to hang the vice president of the United States, and they're going to put a bullet in my F-word head. And he will not send the National Guard. People were injured, over 100 law enforcement people were injured. Some people died because of him. And people died again because of his delay and denial about COVID. This is a totally irresponsible person. And again, this Supreme Court would say that a person is above the law, and they've waited months to come to a conclusion about it. It's going to be a very important day for America.
Right now, you can't bet on some white knight to stand between that guy and the White House, or some easy, simple, uniting process. Right now, there is just Joe Biden and all of you, the American people out there. That's who there is. Joining me now is my old boss, David Plouffe. He was the campaign manager for Barack Obama in 2008 and a senior advisor in the Obama White House. So, Plouffe, I've been talking to lots of people, as I'm sure you have been. I just gave my rundown of my take on things. What did I miss? What did I get wrong there? Don't hold back.
No, it was a great rundown, Jen. I think here's the question. I think all signs point to Joe Biden staying in this race and being our nominee. And that's his right. And really, obviously, he's got family members and advisors, but he's the only voice that matters. And so if he does that, this is a race that we were slightly behind heading into the debate. We'll see where the race stands as we process it in the days to come as we get more data. But CBS News just had a poll today. 72% of Americans don't think he has the mental capability to be president. You're not going to win the White House with those numbers. Now, 49% of the people don't think Trump either, right? So if Biden is to stay in this race, and I think he is, and I have all the confidence in the world in the campaign, Jen O'Malley, Dillon, and others will run, they could run the perfect campaign. It won't get you to a win number of 270 electoral votes unless that fitness number were to get better. So the question is, what are you going to do? he's going to have to be much more aggressive with all the risk that comes with that. A lot more interviews, even in unfriendly places. I think anyway, do the September 10th debate. If Trump does it, maybe do more. Like, that's the big thing. I've learned it can be humbling when you're part of the campaigns. Campaigns don't change big things. They help you on the margins. And there's two big things right now. Well, there's three big things. Donald Trump is a super weak candidate. Who can be beat? People's view of the economy is not what we'd like it to be. It's improving a little bit. How do you win that debate on the economy, where Joe Biden has some strength in terms of he cares about people like me, working people? And then this age and fitness question. So I think a race that was already going to be hard to win has gotten harder, and we just all need to embrace that. And I think what you said was so important. If you believe that Donald Trump's election is an existential threat to the country, and I think probably slightly more than half the country believes that, then this is not a race that you try to win. You have to win it. And so as Joe Biden is thinking about the way forward, in my humble view, that has to be like, you can't lose. You got to win. And you got to be sure you're the right person to do that. I think he's got a lot of strengths. I think he's been a great president, but we have to understand where the race is right now, which is we are behind. And we can talk about all the presidents who had bad first debates, and a bunch of them did. Reagan, Obama, Bush were all ahead in their elections. So we had to take that opportunity last Thursday night. Joe Biden did not. He made a problem that's close to existential worse. It doesn't mean it can't be addressed, but it's going to require great strategy, great tactics. And there's risk on both sides, as you said. There's a whole bunch of downsides about a new process. There's downsides staying where we are. Like, we should just, as you know, having worked in the White House, generally every day is deciding between worse options. That's kind of where we are. But, I think this is a race that can be won, because Donald Trump showed again in the debate and that awful rally afterwards why there's enough Americans out there that don't want to sign up for another Donald Trump term. But right now, we're not where we need to be. So that's where I think where the focus needs to be is, how do we change a race that we're now heading towards a loss to a win?
And it's very incumbent on the president. I mean, the buck stops with the candidate, just to kind of double down on what you just said. I want to ask you, I mean, there's lots of risks and threats. I do want to talk about the open convention possibility, which, again, is not, there's no indication Joe Biden's dropping out or not going to run. But I think it's important for people to understand, who might support that and might still support that, even if they learn more about it, what that would mean. Explain to us kind of what factors should be considered for those calling for a brokered convention. Like, for example, my view is that if he doesn't endorse the vice president of the United States, that's seismic. You may disagree with me, but what are the factors people aren't factoring in here?
Well, Jen, with an important caveat that this is likely not going to happen. So we're engaging in kind of fantasy, but, we can do that. So first of all, yes, there's a threshold question. Would Joe Biden say, I'm not going to run, and I'd like all my delegates to support Kamala Harris? He could say, I want an open convention where people can make their case. Then candidates, Kamala Harris, most importantly, governors, senators, will make a decision about whether to run. What would that look like? It's kind of gross because it's not voters, it's delegates. But you'd basically be running a campaign, both wholesale. Maybe there'd be debates. There'd certainly be a lot of interviews on MSNBC, on podcasts, people traveling to states, meeting with delegates, smoky back rooms. So that's a downside. It's like insiders picking the new person. The political graveyard is littered with people, Ron DeSantis being the latest member of that graveyard, who look like they were surefire, great presidential candidates on paper. And this stage, as you know well, it's withering. Most people don't survive it. So does someone come out of that maybe the party's divided. So there's a bunch of downsides, no question. There maybe is an upside, which is it's a younger, newer face. And we know a lot of Americans, including a lot of Democrats, would like another choice. So that provides, I think, some energy. It's a different race for Donald Trump to win and run, I think, much harder. But so I think that, as often is the case around the presidency and presidential campaigns, there's no Aaron Sorkin screenplay here. There's downsides and challenges, but some upsides on each. But it would not be people who think, oh, we just get somebody else and they're going to walk to the White House. That is complete BS. There's a bunch of landmines in that option as well. I also think there's some upsides, and I think Joe Biden is at the lowest point right now, I think, in terms of his campaign. So you've got to think he can grow from here. And so a race that looks right now to be Donald Trump's small, but, it reminds me of 12, right? There were national polls that showed us tied with Romney, some even down, but we knew reliably we had a small advantage in the battleground states. That's where the race is right now. Can Joe Biden overcome that? I think he can, but we should be honest about where we are, which is without more voters saying, actually, I think he's up for this, we won't win. That's my humble opinion.
Yeah, I think it's so important to be honest about where we are and honest about the fact that there are real discussions, important discussions that people are having out there. And it's important for people to inform themselves and know and understand all the paths. David Plouffe, thank you as always for helping me break all of that down and help people give people more to digest.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.